My earliest memories of church are probably from when I think I was about 3 or 4 years old. My parents would get me up out of bed really early, and I had to wear this polyester shirt, but it would make me break out. Literally, I'd be hot the whole time and all red afterwards, so I couldn't wait to get home and get changed again. But that's what I thought church was that you had to wear really uncomfortable clothes and get up really early in the morning and then go and listen to things. As I started to get older, I kind of started to get this idea in my head that, well, I know that somehow going to church, which is what I always heard, meant somehow sacrificing because Jesus had done a lot of things for us. You know, I lived in a really hot southwestern state with no air conditioning, in a trailer park, and my mom a lot of times during the summer would take me and my little sister to the pool in the trailer park, and we'd spend most of the day there. But from time to time my mom would say there was so-and-so from church walking by and we needed to get down really low in the water so that we wouldn't be seen. So we would kind of hide down there in the water until she went by, and then we could go back to normal again. So I started to have this concept, okay, church, besides being a place that you have to go and wear uncomfortable clothes, it's also maybe something to do with things you're not supposed to do, or at least not let people know that you do them. Around the time that I was 6 or 7 years old, I think, my parents had kind of gradually stopped going to church, and my parents started to get more heavily involved with friends from my dad's workplace, and they started smoking and started drinking and, you know, playing cards with people a lot into the night and having parties. And then my dad started going to, I guess, what must have been bars after work to hang out with his bosses and other people to try to move up in the chain, at least that's what he said, you know, to be able to get promoted. And after a while, he started coming home really drunk. Of course, my little sister and I didn't really understand what that meant at the time, but he wasn't himself. And we would kind of hang out upstairs because we were supposed to be in bed when he got home really late at night, but we would go over to the railing where they couldn't see us and listen to him and my mom arguing and shouting at each other. This was during the time back in the early 70s when divorce wasn't nearly as common as it is now, but I'd heard of it, and I remember my sister and I were convinced it's just a matter of time and they're going to get divorced. And I was actually, I'm not sure about her, but I was actually wishing it would hurry up and happen, because then we'd be done with all of this, you know, shouting and fighting. And I don't think he ever hit her, I think she hit him, but, you know, it scared us. And so we were hoping they would hurry up and get divorced and that hopefully we would live with her and not really have him in the picture anymore. So after a while, though, he was wanting to buy a house, and I gather he needed to have a certain amount of money in the bank by a certain time in order to be able to be allowed to buy the house. And we were living in an apartment at the time. And so I don't know if my mom knew it, none of us knew that he had done this, but he was a manager of a grocery store, and it was up to him every week or at the end of the day or something to take the money from the cash registers and put it in the bank. Well, he temporarily deposited part of it in his own account and then deposited it where it should be later. A lot of time went by, no one knew about it. We didn't actually end up being able to buy the house because he had also declared bankruptcy. But later, he fired somebody, and that guy knew about it. And so he told on him, and he ended up getting fired himself. And That actually turned out to be a really good thing because it really shook my parents up. He started getting, lower level jobs in grocery stores for a while, and then eventually managed to get hired for a job in another state. Where we grew up, we thought we were going to live there forever. So it was a pretty big deal that we had to pick up and move out there. But we did, and he and my mom decided at that point that, okay, we really need to change our lives. So they decided to start going back to church, as they put it, and decided to stop drinking and stop smoking, and we started going regularly, like 2 times a day, every Sunday and every Wednesday night. And then when there were gospel meetings in the evenings, then we went to those, or if there was Vacation Bible School, we went to that. So we got really heavily involved, which is like a total turnaround from the way the first part of my life had been. I really had very little idea of what Christianity was up until that point. And one time I tried to read the book of Revelation, but it was confusing for me at age 7 or 8, so I didn't really learn much. But by this time, I was 11. We were going to the services constantly, and my parents recommended that it would be a good idea for me to start taking notes. So I did, and the more I heard, the more I started to understand, and the more I started to realize how I had crucified and was still crucifying Jesus. That what I was doing and the thoughts I was having were nailing his hands to the cross, and that I was guilty of that, and that, the very things that I knew I was doing are things that he said himself in the New Testament are, things he hates and deserve hell. And I started to be really afraid about that, because I knew that even from a young age, and especially then, by the time I was 11, I was really enslaved, especially to lust, to looking at things with my eyes that I shouldn't be looking at, that I knew I shouldn't be looking at, and then thinking about them later, letting those pictures and images stay with me, and even expanding on them in my mind. And I don't know if I would have used the word slave at the time, but I knew I couldn't stop, because I had tried. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. And I wanted to be forgiven, and I wanted to be clean. I knew how dirty I was. And so I told my parents. I didn't tell them about any of the specific things that I had been doing or thinking, but I told them that I knew that I had crucified Jesus, and I wanted to be baptized. I wanted to have my sins washed away. I wanted to rise up and be a new person. And so they decided to let me do it. I remember that evening, because we needed to wait until it was time for the regularly scheduled services. I was just really wishing the time would hurry up and come, because I was afraid that something was going to happen, that we might have a wreck on the way there or something, and I was going to die and still be in my sin. But we did get there, and my dad baptized me, put me under the water. And just because I was baptized and really wanted Jesus to wash me clean of all my sins, which was really, I think, the only thing that I knew at the time, as far as deep as it went for me. But just because I had done that didn't mean that I stopped really desiring to see things that I knew I didn't need to be looking at, to see immodest things. As I got older, I started to go to movies, often by myself, and I remember I specifically hoped, that I would see things in the movies that were immodest. And I did the same with flyers and other things that came in the mail. You know, I'd look at them before anyone else had a chance to, and, you know, even steal some of them. And I had built up this whole warehouse of images in my mind and imaginations and thoughts with those images that stuck with me for years and years after that and kept haunting me. One thing I remember doing shortly after I was baptized is I wanted to be involved in Jesus' work somehow. And I wasn't sure exactly what that was or what that should look like for an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old. I thought there's got to be something that I can do. And I noticed that in the entryway of the building that we went to for the worship services, that they had these things on the wall holding lots of pamphlets, lots of tracts that were about, you know, some of them about baptism, some of them were about the importance of the Bible, who Jesus is, different things like that. I knew those were there mostly for visitors that came in that were visiting the worship services and didn't know much about God, and they could take some, but I also knew they weren't really getting taken much because we hardly ever had anybody visiting us. Pretty much every time we went, I would get a few more. And then after school and on weekends, I would go around to all the houses, and I actually covered a pretty wide area, but I would go around and put all of these on their doors. That really sticks with me because I remember I was just grappling for what can I do? What can I do to try to be useful to God in some way? You know, but the whole time, I was doing all of that, I was also still really enslaved to all the lust, all the thoughts and memories that I was building up in my head. On Sundays, I don't think anyone ever told me that this was what the Lord's Supper meant, but while we were doing that every week, obviously I couldn't help but think about the fact that I was breaking his body. You know, I was still, even now after, you know, years after being baptized, I was crucifying him and spilling his blood still. And so I would talk to him about that silently, you know, while we were doing that, and tell him how sorry I was and beg him to forgive me, and also beg him to help me to stop doing that. I'd always be really resolved on Sunday, you know, but then the farther it got into the week and the farther away I got from the worship services and more into everyday life at school, surrounded by all my school friends, the harder it was to remember that resolution. And so then it was like every Sunday I was apologizing again and asking him to help me this next week make it different from the week before. You know, we have Bible classes every Sunday morning before the worship services. And it seemed like every time I would move up to the next higher grade level and have a new teacher, everybody really liked to study the book of Acts. We would keep starting over at the beginning. I probably read the first 5 to 10 chapters of Acts 20 times during junior high and high school because, you know, we always would start off, but not never, but rarely ever got to the end. So I was a lot more familiar with the way it started than with the way it ended. But one thing, you know, when you read something over and over again like that and then discuss it over and over like that, you start to notice things like that you read between the lines. I couldn't really put words on it, but I was starting to have this flavor from, especially in Acts chapter 2 and right after, from the way they lived their lives together, that this was totally different than anything I've ever seen. They were each other's friends. I mean, nobody in the denomination that we were going to was my friend, really. I mean, I knew different people. I saw them 3 times a week, and even sometimes we would have, you know, like a watermelon party. I think they called it a watermelon supper down south, or an ice cream supper, or other things like that, a potluck. you know, where everybody would take food together and pitch it in. But they weren't my friends. The people at school were my friends. There weren't very many people I confided in at all, maybe just one or two, but it was someone from school, not someone from church. And it seemed like it was different for them in the beginning, in the first days of the church when it was born. And they were with each other daily, it said. But even more, I mean, the daily part didn't stand out to me as much as the fact that they were each other's lives. You know, they weren't just a part of each other's lives, and they didn't just visit each other, but they were each other's lives. And it started to bother me that I wasn't seeing that around me, and I didn't know how to get there. But I felt like it was really important somehow to get to that point. And, you know, I'd been taught in the denomination that I grew up in that we were the first century church, and that all other denominations, in fact, we weren't a denomination, but everybody else was. And all the denominations had something that was wrong, but we were the first century church. When I was first baptized when I was 11, I believed that wholeheartedly. And I wrote a long letter to a friend of mine that lived in the neighborhood where I was, that we would sometimes play together, because he was in a denomination and I wasn't. And I was trying to convince him of all the things that he had wrong. But as time went on and I started to see some of these things that looked like discrepancies, it's not like I became critical and thought, okay, well, this isn't the church. But rather I figured, okay, this is the closest thing there is today to the church in the first century. You're not going to find anything closer out there, but we still need to change more in order to really be where they were, to be at the point they were at. And so I had every hope that that would happen eventually, and I started to wonder what I could do to contribute toward that, to try to help get us there. But time went on and on and on, and I kept dealing with, or not dealing with, the lust that I was harboring and the thoughts that were building up in my mind. And I was getting very lonely in a sense that I wanted help, but I didn't have anywhere to go for help. There was no one that I trusted enough to actually tell what kinds of things I had done and what kinds of thoughts I had had and desires I gave vent to sometimes. And I really wanted to tell somebody, but at the same time I didn't. And that got harder and harder for me the older I got. The older I got, the more I really wished there was somebody that I could confide in. And I couldn't help but think that, you know, when I read Acts chapter 2 and saw how they were caring about each other and how they were with each other constantly and how nobody considered anything that they had as just belonging to them, but it was everyone else's, that they probably could, you know, somehow tell each other about things that were hard for them, things that were eating them alive, things that they knew were keeping them separated from Jesus or even causing them to crucify him over again. But I couldn't. And so that was very hard. And over time, I started to become more and more not critical of the denomination that I was in, but more hopeless instead of hopeful that we could ever get there from here. It's not like I started to think, okay, somewhere else out there, there's a church that's closer to the one in the Bible than this. But it went from being a hopeful thing, like, well, this is the closest thing there is and it's only going to get better, to a very hopeless thing of this is the closest there is on the face of the earth today, and what hope is there? You know, and the longer I let that thought build up inside of me, then what hope is there without having anybody to talk to, the more I started to feel like I'm not going to do this all my life. That when I get old enough to go to college and move out of the house and be out on my own, I'm going to pick, you know, my parents kind of would like me to go to a Christian college that happened to be nearby, but I was going to pick a state school where I could go and make friends that had nothing to do with the church, and kind of gradually wean myself off of going to the services on Sundays and Wednesdays, because I knew if I stopped all at once that I would feel really guilty about it and it would be hard to do. But I figured if I stopped gradually and just went less and less, then it wouldn't bother me as much. At the same time that I was dealing with having temptations that I couldn't resist and no one to talk to about it, I also was building up, as the older I got, more and more friction between me and my mom. And I didn't really know it at the time, but she was mentally unstable. Actually, I found out much later at her funeral that when she was a child, she had a really serious illness that nearly killed her and it caused some brain damage. But I didn't know all that when I was a teenager. I just knew that she seemed inconsistent with me in her discipline and in her expectations. And of course, being a teenager and full of all kinds of chemicals and emotions, you know, anything is magnified 100 times. And so as I kept getting older, things between her and me kept getting harder and harder. And I don't believe that she did, but at the time I really was convinced that she hated me. I really believed that she wanted to, her goal was one of two things with me, either to drive me insane or to drive me to taking my own life. And as I started to get old enough to actually, what I thought I was old enough to survive outside of the house, I entertained the idea more and more of running away, and started thinking about practicals of how it could work, and especially in the winter time because I get cold easily. There came an opportunity where someone that I was close to, a young lady that I cared about a lot, had to move out to California, which was pretty far away from where I lived. And I got the idea of running away out there. I figured it's always warm there, so winters wouldn't be a problem. And I waited until a time, well, of course it was right after a time when there was kind of an explosion with my mom. But then she was gone and no one was in the house, and I packed up some things and I took off hitchhiking. And that was when I was 15. So I actually got about, more than halfway across the country, and I discovered how easily I could get hurt in an adult world, and so I gave up on it and turned myself in as a runaway and headed back home again. And you have to understand, no one could have predicted that I would run away. I was considered the model child by pretty much everyone who knew me, or the model teenager. Everyone thought of me as respectful, as caring, as well-behaved, never doing anything wrong, never doing anything out of the ordinary, And in some ways they were right, because I was very careful, and I was like the fact that I thought about what will I do in the wintertime. I also thought about things like Well, if I change my mind, I don't want it to interrupt school because I don't want to end up having my grades suffer because of running away. So I ran away in the summertime. But no one really expected that, and that kind of came as kind of a shock. I mean, I was even at this time, in spite of feeling very overwhelmed and burdened down with sin, from time to time I was asked to do what's called leading the singing. Sometimes I was asked to lead prayers, lead everybody in talking to God together. And so, you know, no one really thought of me as somebody who might do something wrong. So I wondered when I came back what everybody's reaction to it would be, because I knew if things were hard before I ran away, they were likely to be much harder now, having that happen behind us. And I was kind of relieved that even though I knew people knew about it, because I knew my parents had told them, nobody ever mentioned it. Everybody acted like nothing had happened. And I was able to just go back to normal and pretend it never happened. Until about half a year later, during the winter break, things had gotten harder and harder again between me and my mom. And I had been gradually getting the thought in my mind of, okay, well, the reason it didn't work out the first time was because I hitchhiked and I was too vulnerable. So I could take the family car and run away that way. And I even picked the same destination because I didn't have anywhere else to go. In fact, I had wanted to run away really ever since I was 13 years old, but I didn't have anywhere to go. And I figured I was too logical even at age 13 to just take off without somewhere to go. So I picked the same destination, but I decided I better take a different route because they knew how I went the first time. And then one day my dad came in and asked me, this was shortly after I got my driver's license and I was 16, and he asked me if, while he was at work, I could take this check and deposit it at one of the other stores that was in the same chain as the one he worked for. And so I said yes. And so I took the car and I took the check and I cashed it, and then I took off. When you want to, you can justify just about anything. But I figured it was the family's car and that made it part mine, and that I had a dire need for it. So I took that, and I took the $50 that I cashed from the check. So I started off from Arkansas across Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. And this time, actually, I got all the way to California. Now, I will have to say my friend and her family were not as happy about it as I had hoped, but especially her family. But I had this problem with my mom where, and I hated it, but when I was with her, all I wanted was to be away from her. And then when I was away, I started remembering only the good things and actually missing her. And so then I would try really hard, try to remember why I left and all the horrible things she had done. And it wasn't working. I wasn't even there yet. I was most of the way there and too tired to keep driving any farther, so I stopped at a motel room and slept. And while I was there, I decided, okay, when I get there, I'm gonna have to call home and turn myself in again, because I'm not gonna be able to go through with this. And I was mad at myself. I hated that. Like, okay, you can't even run away. You can't do anything right. Because I really did feel like that was part of what made high school so hard, besides all the sin, was the fact that I felt like I couldn't do anything. I couldn't play sports. I couldn't, I didn't have a good personality. Couldn't make friends, couldn't be popular in school, and now I couldn't even get running away right. So once I got into town there, I went ahead and called them, and then my dad, he flew out, and then we drove back, all the way back across the country, which I knew was going to be kind of a difficult trip, but he actually didn't say much to me. He took away my driver's license for a while, but one of the main reasons that I mention all of this is because of what happened after I got back. And this really hurt me deeply, more than almost anything that I can remember from that time period. When we got back and went back to the worship services, of course, by and large, nobody talked about it at all, just like with the first time. But by that time, my dad was what was called an elder in the church that they were attending, and that meant that he was in a leadership position. And you know, the Bible talks about elders, and it talks about what makes someone eligible to be an elder, and part of that has to do with how they manage their households, how they manage their families and their children. And one of the other elders took me aside before the worship service one Sunday morning, I think it was, and he said that with my dad being an elder and all, it didn't look good, you know, for me to have stolen the car and run off and made them worry about me, and, you know, especially the stealing the car part, and that it would be better for him, being an elder and all, if I would go forward after the sermon, because that's what people did. You know, at the end of the sermon, the preacher would give an invitation saying, if, you know, anybody needs to come and be baptized or needs to confess any sins, then you can come up, and it would be best for him, you know, if I would consider doing that. And so I did, but I still didn't feel sorry. You know, I still felt justified in everything that I had done. I felt like I was driven to it and I didn't have a choice. I felt so hypocritical though. I knew I needed to do it, but it wasn't my heart to do it. And I was really glad that all that was really expected of you to do was to go up and sit on the front pew, the front bench thing, and write down on a card, you know, something really general that you were repenting of, that you were sorry for, and then have the preacher read it later. And so that's what I did, and I was real general, real generic with what I said, but I figured everybody would know what it was. They just weren't talking about it. And so he read it, and that was all that was ever said about it. But afterwards, and then especially more and more over the months and years after that, I just couldn't help but think, I wish there was somebody that would care enough about me to actually ask me why I did it and find out if there were problems going on in our house, you know, and if there was, you know, anything I needed help with, that we needed help with. And at the same time, I didn't like to think about that too much, because I also didn't really trust anybody well enough to want to talk to them about those things. And I was also afraid that if I said anything to my, you know, about my mom, then it would just make things harder for me at home, because she'd be in a bad mood because of it. And in fact, eventually, because my younger sister, 2 years younger than me, while I was in barely high school, just out of junior high, she tried to take her life. And they had to pump her stomach, and she was in the hospital for a long time. And afterwards, they recommended that my family go and get some psychological counseling. So we went and did that, and it was group sessions. And, you know, the counselor guy would go around and ask us all questions. And even though he told us the ground rules, you know, were to try to not put each other down, but to say things like, when you do this, I feel this way. But in spite of that, my mom sometimes would even just leave the room upset because she felt like my sister and I were just attacking her, and that, you know, she would kind of exaggerate and say, I'm the source of everybody's problems, you know, and I didn't feel like it did any good. Didn't feel like it was very helpful at all. So that just kind of made me more resolute in my thinking that it was better just to not talk to anybody about any of it and just try to wait it out until I was old enough to leave home. So I tried that, but I didn't get very far because I was still 16 when the next spring things had gotten so bad with my mom. And at the same time, with my feeling like I was never going to be able to conquer these sins in my life, and with feeling like it would have been better if I had never been born, and that maybe I shouldn't have been, and I was a mistake, I decided I can't run away. That doesn't work. I've tried it, and that didn't make things any better. You know, counseling didn't make things any better. There's nobody that I can talk to. And so I felt like all I can really do is just not live anymore. And so I tried that. This was a Sunday morning, and I remember I told my parents that I wasn't feeling good, and because I wasn't after a while, and that I needed to stay home from church. So they all got ready and were almost heading out the door. And I was lying in my bed, and I couldn't make myself not think about the fact that killing is a sin. And if I took my own life, then I would be with Jesus face to face, and no time to repent. That's one sin, that there's no time to repent afterwards. And I knew for a fact, even though I had managed somehow over the months of thinking about it to convince myself that I wouldn't go to hell, I knew for a fact that I would. And so I called my parents in and told them what I had done. I had to be in the hospital for about a week after that. Afterwards, I still had another 2.5 years to go of high school almost. And I spent that 2.5 years I felt like I had already died, like my life had ended, that I had no life anymore. I didn't have a life left. I didn't think I should be alive, that I should have ever been born, that I had any reason to live. It's just that I thought, just like I'm not good in sports, I failed in trying to run away from home, I also failed in killing myself. You know, I can't do anything. And so I just resolved to get through those last 2.5 years the best that I could. And as painful things would happen, I'd have an argument with my mom. My dad was, the reason I hardly ever mention him is he was out of the picture most of the time. Even after he stopped going to bars after work and everything, he would just come home and eat and then watch TV until he fell asleep in his bedroom. He was an elder at the building, the services that we were attending 3 times a week or more, depending on what was going on. He was a leader there that was supposed to be, you know, helping other people's children too, but I hardly ever talked to him about anything at all. He didn't really know anything that was going on in my life. And even after the running away and trying to end my life, he didn't ask much about it. So I hardly ever saw him or spent any time with him or talked to him about anything. So it was mostly my mom. So the only thing I knew to do was I just wasn't the kind of person that would do anything illegal, at least unless I could justify it, like stealing the car. And plus I didn't hang out with any people that had access to illegal drugs. Otherwise, who knows what I would have done. And my sister ended up doing some of that as she started to get more and more involved with all her boyfriends. The only thing I knew to do, since I had pretty bad allergies, I always had different kinds of non-prescription medicines around. And when things would get really hard for me and I'd have an argument with my mom, or I mean, most of the time I didn't argue back to her, but you know, if she would yell at me or not let me do something I thought I should be allowed to do, then I would just take things to try to help me sleep so that I could escape. I just wanted to get away. I went to movies, like, you know, especially movies that fed the lust that I had going inside of me to want to see immodest things, and somehow thought that might make me feel better, you know, but of course it didn't. It only made me feel worse afterwards. And other than that, I pretty much just did my homework. After I got out of the hospital from trying to end my life, one of the doctors had told my dad that it would be a good idea if I had a job outside of the home. So he made me go and get a job at one of the grocery stores in the chain that he worked for. And that did seem to help some, just because anytime I wasn't at school, then I was either working right after school or getting home kind of late and doing all of my homework into the night, and then sleeping, and then up the next day. So really the weekends were the hardest part, because most of the time I was able to, I ate my meals in my room. One of my excuses was that I had so much homework to do, which I did, that I needed to eat while I did my homework. Plus, my mother and sister, while we were still very actively involved in the church, and my dad was an elder, my mother and sister started smoking. And with my allergies and asthma issues, I didn't do very well with cigarette smoke. So that was also one of my excuses for staying in my room all the time, was to stay away from the smoke. Finally, I actually got to my senior year in high school, and I couldn't believe it, that it was really happening. And I actually might eventually be able to move out of the house and never see my parents again. And I was really looking forward to that. I had applied at some state schools and been accepted, and I was planning actually to start going to a school in Texas. I just didn't plan to keep going to church anymore. I didn't plan to keep going to the worship services and the Bible classes and all those things. But I wanted to stop going gradually, because I knew that it would bother my conscience too much if I stopped all at once. So I was thinking about all of that. And then my dad mentioned, you know, there was a Christian school nearby, and he and my mom hadn't gone there, but they'd gone to a different one, and thought it would be a good idea for me to at least consider going there. But I didn't want to, mostly because it was too close to home, and also because I wanted to go off to a state school and make friends outside of anything religious, and just kind of put that whole part of my life behind me. And kind of my excuse for doing that was that if what I'm seeing around me is the closest thing there is on the planet Earth to the first century church, and yet the way our lives are with each other, they don't mesh together. We're not with each other daily. We're not helping each other. We're not encouraging each other. And there's nobody for me to talk to about all these things going on inside of me. Then if that's the closest thing there is, and it's that far away from what God really originally meant, then somehow I felt like that excused me to just turn my back on it altogether. And that's what I planned on doing. At the same time that I planned on turning my back on God, I also still had some sense of what was right and what wasn't right. And so I knew people who had gone to this Christian school, or still were even, this college, and I knew that, for one thing, they had Bible classes that were mandatory. You know, the Bible classes we went to before the services every Sunday morning, those were optional. You could go or not go. And usually the people who went, instead of just showing up for the worship services and getting extra sleep, were the people who were more serious about God, or at least that's what we thought. Something about the Bible class being mandatory just didn't seem right, you know, because then you wouldn't have to be there because you wanted to be there. You would just be there because you had to be there. And on top of that, you got a grade for it that was part of your actual transcript, your college transcript. And I just couldn't even process that. Like, getting graded to study the Bible just didn't make any sense to me at all. It felt wrong. It felt immoral, you know, to get graded for that. And so that was the Bible classes. And then on top of that, I had heard that everyone had to go to what they called chapel every morning before classes, and that was like a mandatory worship service. And so the whole thing just felt really off, really wrong, and I didn't want to get involved in any of that, and I didn't want to have the pressure on me of getting a grade for how well I studied the Bible, you know, how well I learned what the Bible says. If I got a good grade, then I might be prideful about it, and if I got a bad grade, then what does that say about me? So I wasn't even considering it. I wasn't sending them my transcript or anything, applying there. But when it got to be spring of my senior year in high school, my dad, I guess, had been talking behind my back to someone in admissions there, and he said, would you be willing to go for a day to take a tour of the college? And it meant having a day off from high school. So I figured, well, what high school senior wouldn't want to take a day off from school and go do something else? So I went ahead and agreed to go. While we were there, I wasn't very impressed with the college, and because, you know, it was a lot smaller than the one I was thinking I was going to go to. But what stood out to me, and at first I didn't even know what it was, but practically everybody we would pass by, everybody we saw, would smile at us and look us in the eye and say hi to us as we were passing by. And at first I didn't even know that's what it was. I just knew something was really different, like I felt welcomed. And eventually I figured out that's what it was. I had been harboring a thought in the back of my mind, I think I kept it pushed to the back of my mind, that maybe the Christianity that you read about in the New Testament might really exist, or might really be possible to exist still today, this 2,000 years later almost it was. And that experience of walking through the campus kept sticking with me that day and on into the evening after we got home. And I couldn't help but think, this is kind of crazy, this is a wild, unlikely possibility, but maybe what I've been looking for all my life, I might actually find it here. I tried to talk myself out of it because it was totally opposite of everything I'd already been working towards. But so I told my dad, after I couldn't talk myself out of it, I wanted to go there. So it was already partway into spring, and I had never sent them a transcript or an application or test scores or anything. So I got all that done really fast and actually ended up starting there that fall. Once I got to the college and started taking classes, I made friends with some people that treated me, it seemed like to me, like I was actually likable. And I never really thought of myself as being likable. And I never really had maybe one friend. For the first time really in my life, I felt loved. And I wasn't used to that feeling at all. And I remember at one point, I just got down on the floor in my dorm room and was crying and telling Jesus that I was so sorry for spending the last years and years, however many years, being so totally engrossed in myself and being only aware of me and only caring about what was happening to me and what was hurting me and not noticing anybody else around me. And it just came to me that, wow, there could be people, even people I'm going to class with, that hurt more than I do. And I could actually care about them, find some way to care about them, to show them they're not alone, instead of just being so totally pulled into myself and noticing how everything affects me. And at that moment, I decided for the first time in years that I wanted to live, that I actually wanted to continue my life, that I didn't want it to end. Because even then, I still thought it's only a short matter of time and this will all be over. But I told him I wanted to live, and from now on, my life wasn't going to be about me anymore. It was going to be about people around me. And I was going to notice them, and I was going to look for ways that I could help other people not to be so alone and hurting like I was. And I didn't really know how to do that or what that was going to look like, but I knew that finally I had a reason to live. And until then I didn't. It was almost like being born again, even though it was a little confusing to me because I knew that I had been baptized way back when I was 11 years old. And that's when I had not really confessed my sins, but confessed them to Jesus and asked for forgiveness. But still now I felt like I had a life to live, that there was a reason for me to be alive and not just left buried in the water there. You know, that I had a purpose. And I had never really felt that before. And so now I had to go out and find out, okay, so what does this look like? What is it? How do I care about other people? And I didn't really know how to care about people or what to do. Or, I knew I couldn't just ask people to tell me everything that they were afraid to tell anybody. Because I knew I wouldn't want that. I kept that in mind though, and I tried to do what I could. And as time went on, then I became aware of a group, kind of a faction that existed within the denomination that I had grown up in. And so I started to look into it more deeply and wondering, okay, what does this mean for me? Because I was still looking for what I didn't know what I had been looking for all my life, but I knew I'd been looking for something. And I thought, okay, well maybe this has something to do with it. I actually went the spring before graduation to a type of seminar or workshop that they were holding up in Chicago. and got the idea of moving there after I graduated. And so I talked to someone there and they said, sure, come on. So that's what I did. Keep in mind, they really hardly knew me. They met me at this seminar thing that I attended, which was mostly speeches given by different leaders in this movement. But they invited me to come and be part of the teen ministry and help with the young people. So I moved up there to do that, but it was kind of bittersweet because at the same time as I was getting more and more interested in this thing off to the side, I was also gradually starting to meet more and more students at the college that were thinking a lot of the same things I was, that were noticing that the church in the New Testament was made out of real relationships with each other, and that it was important to actually get involved in each other's lives in some way, or at least to try to get involved in each other's lives, to talk to each other about things that were hard, things that were happy, you know, good things and bad things, to actually know each other instead of just visit each other. And so we had started doing some of that, but we were just kind of scattered students who are all groping and trying to find what does God really want for our lives. And you know, we had a lot of confusing ideas about all of that. Some wanted to be preachers. I thought I wanted to be a youth minister. I wanted to find a way to care about young people. So I didn't really want to leave them behind, but at the same time I felt like I really needed to find out what was going on at this other thing. Though after I'd been there for a while, a couple of things happened. One of them was positive in a way, and that is that whether I had really ever bowed my knee to Jesus as my Lord and let Him have control of my life and be the decision maker, the king, the boss of my life, was brought into question. And I knew that I really hadn't. I mean, while I was in college, there was a summer where I came across some teaching that made me realize for the first time that I just never thought about it before, that part of becoming a Christian involves dying. And I bring this up now because I think the dying and Jesus being Lord are related. They're tied together. But I had never thought of that before. And you know, someone made the analogy of the lambs that were sacrificed in the Old Testament, that when they were laid up on the altar, they no longer had any rights of their own whatsoever. And when the lamb is giving up its life to be sacrificed, then it's giving up its right to have a life, its right to make decisions, its right to make plans, to decide where I want to work. Of course, lambs wouldn't be thinking that, but I would. Lambs might be thinking about where I want to graze, but where I want to work, the fact that I really wanted to be married someday, and everything about your life. If you're a sacrifice, then that's laid up there on the altar with you too. Philippians, I think it is, says that we are to follow like Jesus, who made himself absolutely nothing and gave over his life even to the point of death. He gave himself up for us, even to the point of death. And he was the murdered lamb. And what does that mean for us? That part of being baptized and taken down under the water, you don't bury someone alive, it means you die. And I had never thought of that before. So now fast forward back to when I was in Chicago, and I realized when I was baptized the first time when I was 11, I wanted my sins forgiven, but that was about as deep as it went. And so I decided I needed to be baptized, not again, but for the first time, and die this time. And rise up to a new life and let him be the decision maker from now on, and let him be the one who would call the shots. And if he didn't want me to ever be married, that was okay. If he wanted me to live in Chicago for the rest of my life, that was okay. And so I did, and that was a very positive thing that happened. But around that same time, I'll never forget the one day, the guy who was helping me to learn how to work with the teens, he took me with him to talk to this one guy who was probably about 13 years old. He knew that this teenager had been involved in smoking or something like that, and he didn't tell him he knew. So he pretended not to know. So instead we sat down just seemingly to study the Bible with him randomly. And what we started reading about, though, was Achan in the Old Testament, when he kept some of the things that God had said should be destroyed after the battle in Jericho, and he hid them in his tent. You know, he said to him, "Now I know you're always honest with me." And, you know, he kept pressing him, and eventually the 13-year-old guy brought out what he had done and told the truth about what had happened. And that was to be an example of how to work with people and how to help people out. And it bothered me because it wasn't honest. It felt like manipulation, that it would be better to just be honest, you know, and talk about things openly, out in the open, than to try to get somebody to do something when they don't even know everything you know about the situation. At the same time, I began to notice that the same manipulation that I was being taught to use on the teenagers didn't just stop with the teenagers, and I don't know why I thought it would, but I started to realize that I was being manipulated too. Once I realized that, I knew that I was going to have to go back home. I was going to have to leave. If I stuck around, then I would just be convinced that, oh, it's okay. So I had moved there to stay, and that was hard for me, coming from originally Texas, moving to a cold place like Chicago and being so far from what I always considered home was hard for me to do. I moved up there to stay because I felt like Jesus was worth it, and if there was somehow that I could grow and change and become like the first century Christians were, and if I could learn to help other people like I wanted to, then it was worth anything. And so I knew I had to leave and head back. But I also knew one thing was for sure: I couldn't ever go back to just sitting in a pew in a religious building, listening to speeches and singing songs and then going home until I see people again a few days later or a week later. I couldn't go back to that. So if I was going to leave, it was going to have to be for something more real, not for something less real. So I got in touch with some of the people back where I had come from. By this time, of course, I had graduated, some had graduated from college, but not all had. So there were still a lot of people living in that college town. And I went back to see them again and to start living near them again. I was still thinking at the time I needed to finish my graduate school degree. So that wasn't possible in that town. So I had to move to a town about an hour away from them. But even though I was living there, my heart was where they were. And so I would get up in the mornings, go to my classes, and then drive an hour away to be with them and spend the rest of the day talking with people, praying with people, you know, trying to work through situations. and until late at night, and then drive back just to sleep. And this went on for a while, of me living an hour away from most of the people that I wanted to really intertwine my life with, which made it kind of hard. I really wanted to be where all of them were so that I could see them in real life daily situations, and so that I could be able to talk with them about things that were happening in my life on a real-time basis instead of saving it up until I could hurry up and drive out there. But I did that for several months, and then at one point all of us decided that it would be a good idea for us to head out to Oklahoma for this workshop thing, which is like a big seminar that the denomination we had grown up in, but were actually by this time feeling less and less attached to, was putting on. They did this once a year, convention center like stuff, booths set up all over the place for people who published Christian magazines could come and sell subscriptions to their magazines. Authors who wrote books could come and sell their books. So there's just a lot of hodgepodge of different people there with their wares, selling things mostly. And there were lots of sermons, lots of speeches given. People brought in that were the really high-powered speakers of the day to try to be a little more cutting edge and talk about things that are more challenging for people, to try to get people to become more serious in their walk with Jesus. And so we thought it would be a good idea for us to head out there and just try to meet people that might be more serious about following Jesus than the average person, and talk to them and see where it went, because that was kind of what we were doing at the time. We didn't know what else to do. So we had been going around, you know, in the town where most of us lived, even though I didn't, but also in the town where I was going to grad school. We would go around and visit different religious groups, different denominations, even though we had been told, you know, growing up that we shouldn't talk to them because they're in error. And just trying to find anybody out there that wanted following Jesus to be something more than going to meetings, you know, or going to classes, that wanted their life to actually be about Jesus. And we had gotten the idea that there may be people outside of the denomination we grew up in that felt that way, and maybe some who knew it and some who didn't know it yet, but that always sensed that what you read about in the Bible is different from what they saw going on around them. And so we thought, okay, at this workshop, a lot of them come from different states to go to it, and there's money, expense involved in doing that, there's time involved in doing that, and they must be wanting to be challenged, because otherwise they wouldn't be going and subjecting themselves to harder speeches. And so maybe we would be able to find some people that we could at least have a conversation with. And so we went, and while we were there, some of the folks that I came with wandered by a booth that they started talking about later afterwards. I never saw it, but there were people there at the booth from another city that weren't selling anything, and that really caught their attention, that they weren't trying to sell anything at all. In fact, they had all of these tapes and books and other things, some they had written, some other people had written, that you could tell they must have paid money for, that they were giving away to anybody that wanted them. And of course that caught their attention, and they started talking with different people there at the booth. And so I kept hearing little rumors about that here and there, and I was really skeptical, because as we had been going around and meeting different people, what we kept running into was that people out there would love to have a bunch of young, on-fire college students come and be part of what they're doing and contribute their energy toward that, but not necessarily being willing to die to their own lives and their own selves and habits and attitudes and everything else, but just wanting to absorb us, you know, because we were young and we had a lot of energy and we seemed to care. And so I assumed these people they were meeting must be similar, you know. And so I kind of ignored it and didn't pay much attention, and I think we were there for several days. So afterwards, when we got back to our homes, then one of the guys that lived in the college town gave me a tape and said, well, just listen to this when you have time. And so I hung on to it, and then a day or two later, when I was back, he gave me another one. And I started thinking, I'm gonna have to hurry up and listen to these because he's gonna want them back. So I went ahead and popped one in and started listening to it. And I was really surprised because what I heard, it wasn't anything I had never heard before, but I had this feeling like the woman at the well when Jesus was talking to her, and she ran back and told all of her friends, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. And I felt like someone just told me everything I ever thought, but didn't know it, couldn't put words on, you know. And so I started listening over and over again because I wanted to hear more, but I didn't have more. So, and I think for some reason it was a couple of days before I could go back again. And so I just listened over and over again because I figured I could get more out of it each time if I was paying attention. After I went back, then he gave me more tapes and things to read. And we started sharing these things with each other more. We started getting together and listening to things together and then talking about them together and trying to see how we could put things into practice, things that we always knew were in the Bible, but had never really been able to put clear words on or to see how it could be lived out. And now it was starting to make sense. You know, things like applying encourage each other daily as long as it's called today. I knew it couldn't look like what I had seen in Chicago. I knew it couldn't be manipulation. And yet I knew also that the Bible wouldn't say that if there weren't a reason for it. And I also knew from my own experience how badly I wished somebody could have helped me when I was in high school and just being eaten alive inside and with no one to talk to. So as we were listening and reading things, we realized that, wow, these are not sermons like what we're used to. These are real people, not even always the same person, but just different people talking about what's really happening in their lives and what they're learning from it. And what they were learning from it was really helpful to us because, for one thing, we started to understand that to encourage or admonish each other daily so that nobody is hardened by sin's deceitfulness requires that you've got to actually see each other in your everyday lives, to notice things, to be able to bring them up. That it's not all about, you know, all these deep, dark, hidden secrets about yourself and need the courage to mention it to somebody else so they can pray with you. But just one of many, many things that started to stand out was that, wow, if you're living your lives with each other, caring about each other daily, it may never even get to that point. You know, it may never get to the point that it was with me when I wanted to die in high school, because you're seeing things along the way and talking about them as they occur before they become this big thing that's this mountain that you can't get past because you don't want anyone to know about it. And you're afraid of what the consequences would be if they did know about it. But before it ever even reaches that point, you're able to talk to each other about things as they come up, as they come along, and help each other keep your eyes straight on Jesus and help each other think about things straight. Because, you know, everybody knows, even people who don't want to follow Jesus, this is not a secret. Everybody knows that a person is not the best judge of his own thoughts or his own character. Even the world knows that other people can see things more objectively. Well, how much more so if Jesus actually lives inside of us and gives us the ability to see things that go past what you can see with your eye and what you can hear with your ear, to actually sense things because of his Spirit being real, not just something that existed 2,000 years ago, but really being inside of real people, that how much more we can help each other before things ever get so big and so hard and so unsurmountable. And that's just one, you know, one of the things that started to occur to us as we were listening to just plain ordinary people, not even leaders, talking about their everyday lives and encouraging each other on tapes and in things that were written down. One night when I was back in the town where I lived going to grad school, I got a phone call from somebody in the college town, and he said, guess what? We talked to some of the folks that had been at the booth on the phone, and they are willing to come down and spend a few days with us. And we were just elated. We couldn't believe it. So to come to a tiny college town that most people had never even heard of and spend a few days with us, and there was only a few of us to begin with. It's not like we were this big, you know, church. We were amazed. So I remember really looking forward to when they would get there, and then when they did, of course I was there, drove over there, and they spent probably a weekend or a little bit more than a weekend with us. But what I saw in their lives was 1,000 billion times more than anything I could glean, you know, just from listening to a cassette tape of people talking about things or reading something. The first thing that really stood out was, you know, we were all just in college or just out of college and had very little money. And they must have noticed that. We didn't think about it really. It just seemed normal to us. But just in the short time they were with us, they were constantly giving to us. And, you know, we went to a restaurant, and most of the time, you know, we ate TV dinners or ramen noodles. So we go to a restaurant, and I went to the restroom and came back, and my check was gone because someone else had paid for it. And I felt really really like a heel for thinking, you know, what I had about them when I was at the fairgrounds during the workshop, that they just wanted to take advantage of us and absorb us into whatever they were doing because we were young and full of energy. Because everything they did, not only that weekend, but even, you know, when different people came down and spent a little bit of time with us off and on throughout that next summer, and constantly just gave themselves away to us. And I wouldn't even know what that means, what that looks like, to give yourself away, but I saw it. Of course, that just made me and made all of us want to do that for each other when they weren't around, you know, because we never thought about that. We never thought about taking a risk financially and sacrificing for somebody else, you know, to pay for their food, or, you know, pay their way into some place that has an entrance fee, or help them with their monthly rent, or, you know, anything like that. It just hadn't occurred to us until we saw it being lived out in front of us, and nobody said, you should be doing this. You know, nobody said that. They wouldn't have, but we wanted to. And so we've started trying to be the kind of friends to each other that we should have been all along. As we were trying to care more about each other day to day, we had more people come and want to be part of us, whatever that meant. We weren't even sure what that meant. But relatives or friends from home of people who were already living near us and spending a lot of time with us in the evenings and through the days. And also people that we had met when we were in college, a few, wanted to try to live out their lives with us. And as more of that happened, we started to get into situations that were tricky for us, where we weren't really sure how to tell who was serious about following Jesus and who wasn't, and where we would have disagreements that would come up among different people and not know how to work through them. Looking back later, when I became familiar with the scripture that I never really heard anything about in terms of one-on-one relationships, it made sense. And that was when Jesus said, if you're having a problem with a brother or a sister, go to them and them alone. And then if they won't listen to you, bring 2 or 3 others. And if they won't listen even to them, then bring in the church. The only thing I'd ever heard that meant was, okay, if there's somebody out there that's committing some known sin that's a really major sin and everybody knows about it, then you should the whole church should disfellowship them and not have anything to do with them. I never saw, though, how that fit in with everyday one-on-one interactions between people. Because, I mean, when Jesus talked about it, he made it sound like starts off with just 2 people, and then you bring in a few others to help, and then if you're not getting anywhere, then you bring in the whole church. I had more than one roommate after I had actually made the decision to move back to the college town where most of the people were living. I had multiple roommates, and then we had some from out of town come and stay with us. And we started to experience friction, and we didn't know how to work through it. Who's in the right, who's in the wrong. I had things that I wasn't sure between me and one of the guys that was living with us, if it was my fault or if it was his fault, but there was friction developing. And one of the ladies, one of the sisters who came to spend a little bit of time with us that summer from out of town, I was talking with her and someone else at lunch one day and kind of talking about this situation where I didn't know what to, how to see this properly, and is it me, is it him? And she just looked at me and said, well, have you told him the things you're telling me now? And that just opened up a whole universe for me, because for some reason I had never even thought about it before, that I could actually be honest with somebody and just tell them, we had this argument or we had this disagreement about this thing, and I don't know if it's me, if it's you, if it's both of us that need to change, but can we talk about it? That kind of honesty and openness with other people didn't come naturally for me, but I don't know if it comes naturally for anybody, really. But I'd never even thought of it before as a possibility. Since that day, really, ever since that day, I've tried to learn and grow more and more in that, to just be able to be real with people. Now all of a sudden it made sense, because we could just be honest and real and open with each other. And if we're not getting anywhere, if I'm blind and I'm not seeing it, or he is, or we both are, then we can get help from other people. And it doesn't have to be this thing of, oh, you want to bring other people in, then you must want to disfellowship me, but rather the tuning fork inside of me, so to speak, resonated at that frequency as soon as I heard it. It was like I recognized Jesus' spirit in her when she said that, because it was so totally opposite of what I had been trained, or was trying to be trained to do in Chicago. That instead of manipulating somebody to try to get them to some point, I could just be honest and talk to them openly about what was going on and work through it together. And then if we couldn't work through it together, then we could get help from other people. We both really want to just know what's true, and how can we change, and how can Jesus really be glorified instead of, injured in this relationship or in this situation that's going on. I said that opened up a whole universe for me, because I just kept discovering more and more ways that applies, more and more ways that I could just be real and open and honest with people instead of trying to achieve something. Even if I was talking to someone I didn't know about Jesus and why they ought to give him their life and let him be their Lord and follow him, be baptized, all those things I was always taught by various different groups of people all throughout my childhood and life of, do it this way, always felt like sales, which was something I was never good at and never really wanted to be good at, because it felt so fake and I wasn't very good at being fake. And just the idea that I don't have to be fake in order to help somebody, and I don't have to be fake in order to bring somebody to Jesus. I don't have to be fake in any situation. It was just eye-opening for me, and has helped me every day pretty much of my life since. So eventually the time came though when I and a lot of other friends of mine felt more attached to these folks in another city than we ever thought was possible from a distance. That it didn't feel like it was us and them anymore. It felt like we were all part of the same thing, all part of Jesus. And that there was help going on across the miles in real life, practical situations. In a way you could say we felt intertwined with them, with their lives, and I don't just mean them as a group of people in some generic way, but specific people's lives that we had benefited from, that we loved and cared about. And so, not all at once, but at different times, different ones felt the need to move and live closer to all of these guys and be able to care for them and be cared for by them on a daily basis, which is hard to do from so far away. And I did too. Just like getting baptized didn't make all of my problems going away. Moving to where I was surrounded by a lot of people who loved me and had Jesus' spirit living inside of them to be able to see beyond just the eyes and to hear beyond the ears, to help me, didn't mean that all my problems went away and I became spiritual, just all of a sudden. Eventually, I knew that even though I had opened up to other brothers about the things that I had done in the past, the things that tempted me in the present, and the weaknesses that I had, that Jesus still wasn't getting his full benefit out of my life if it was still, something that I gave into from time to time, and then told others about it, told Jesus about it, and told him how sorry I was, and just kept that cycle going. And so there came a point when I realized I'm going to have to talk to Jesus face to face and be honest and open and real with him like I am with other people, and decide if I really am willing to just walk away from all that stuff and not even keep it as a possibility in my back pocket that I'll go back to it. Because I realized that's what I was doing. And I didn't want to just, flippantly say, yeah, I'm gonna do that, and then not be any different. So I didn't know how long I was gonna be up talking to him about it, but I ended up all night talking to Jesus about this and, considering what this really means, for my future, so that I knew when I'm giving him this as a gift, I'm really letting go of it. But at the same time, I also knew that I couldn't just decide to not sin. I had tried that ever since I was 11. And that morning, I was talking to one of the brothers about it, and he asked if we could pray together and just talk to Jesus about these things. And we did. And, he asked Jesus to heal me, to just take that away. And it's not like he was some leader or some special gifted person, but Jesus heard that and he listened, and the miracle that only he can give, he gave, and I was set free. And even though there are memories that are hard to get rid of after years and years and years of giving into sins, and old patterns that can sometimes creep up and be easy to fall into, that lust itself that used to be inside of me, taking over control of me even when I didn't want it to, is not in me anymore. Things come at me from the outside, but it's been totally different ever since that day, because it's not in me anymore. For so long, I felt like I had no reason to live, because no one was caring about me, no one was helping me, and I felt like I needed it really bad. I thought it was their fault, whoever they are, and I kind of resented them. Now that I'm older, and now that I've been so loved and cared on for so long, I know that they were just like me. Probably not all of them had the same story I had with the same details, but they had grown up just like me in this thing and had the same things happen to them. And they didn't know any other way to live. They didn't know what else to do other than to repeat what they had seen all their lives. We were all just as guilty, I was guilty of not opening up about who I was and pretending to be somebody I wasn't. They were guilty of not caring enough to even ask the question, and of trying to keep appearances up when things were known, like the time that I stole the family car. But even though we were all guilty, we didn't know what else to do. We didn't know any other way. The best beginning of a solution that I know of in my experience so far in life is being honest. Being honest about what I see, what we see, what you see, and calling a spade instead of going along with the show. We've all already done so many things wrong that it can feel like if I start to expose this thing that I'm a part of, this house of cards, that it'll all start crashing down and I'll be convicted with it. I'll be, incarcerated, so to speak, with this whole thing. It's just all held up because none of us wants our own lives to be exposed. But if we're willing to stop and think about everything Jesus has done for us and the price that he paid for us, then it's kind of worth it if it does come crashing down on me and on you and on anybody else. It's kind of worth it because he at least deserves that we would be honest and that we be real with each other and talk about things as they really are instead of pretending, and if it hurts us, okay. I mean, we're only going to live so long anyway. I thought my life was over when I was 16, but if I live to 96, that's still not all that much longer. We're only going to live so long anyway, and then no one will even remember us. So is it really that big of a loss if we let ourselves be exposed, if we risk that in the hopes that Jesus can actually start to have his way in people's lives and turn this whole thing around? Growing up, as far as I could think of, I only had one friend, and he didn't know everything about me. He knew I wanted to die, but he didn't know why. Now, today, I can't even count how many friends I have who live for me every day and die for me. Not just would die for me, but do die for me by dying in the same way, that Jesus called us to die for him, to die with him, by giving ourselves up, giving up our rights and our preferences and our plans and everything else. They're doing for me every day. And even just calling them friends feels really trite. I don't even like to use that word because they're more than friends. They're like part of me and I'm part of them. Hundreds of people every day helping me with my wife and my marriage, helping me with my children, who I would never have even had the slightest idea how to help grow up. Yeah. My children talk to me all the time about everything that's going on in their minds and hearts and lives. And there's no inhibition there. They're not afraid of me like I was of my dad. They don't hate me like I did my mom, but instead they trust me and they know how much I love them and that I would die literally for them, not just figuratively, but in practical ways. And I never thought it was possible for a mom and a dad to actually be so close to their children that they're like a brother or a sister, that they are a brother or a sister. And there's no inhibition there just because we're their parents. It's beyond anything that I can express. Now, I know what my reason is to live, and it's even a little bigger than I thought it was when I got to college, which was to help people who were hurting more than I was. It's to help Jesus's life spread out from me and from all of his people to anyone, anywhere who will let him in and will let him take over.